Have you ever noticed how the smartest people often struggle the most with simple decisions? They see every angle, every risk, every possible failure, and that vision, which should be wisdom, becomes a prison. They wait for perfect certainty, for a sign that will never come, while life moves forward without them. This is not caution. It is fear dressed in the clothes of prudence. In 1489, in a merchant's counting house in Florence, two brothers stood at the edge of a choice that would define their futures. One possessed all the knowledge he needed but could not move. The other understood a truth that would change everything. Courage is not the absence of doubt, it is the quiet act of stepping forward while your hands still tremble. Marco sat before the ledger, quill suspended above unmarked parchment. Beside him, his brother Thomas waited, restless. "We must decide," Thomas said. "The silk shipment arrives in 3 weeks. If we buy, we profit, or we lose everything." Marco's eyes moved across the figures without truly seeing them. His father had built this merchant house through 30 years of careful calculation, and Marco had inherited not wealth, but weight, the crushing responsibility never to squander what had been entrusted to him. "The market is uncertain," Marco said quietly. "The French tariffs change weekly. The roads are unsafe with bandits. We could lose the entire investment. Or we could double it," Thomas replied, his voice steady. "The silk sells well in every quarter. The demand is clear." Marco set down his quill. "How can you be so certain?" "I am not certain," Thomas said simply. "But I am willing to act on what I know." This was the chasm between them. Thomas moved through the world with the lightness of conviction. Marco moved through it weighted by the gravity of every possibility, seeing all the angles, all the dangers, paralyzed by the multiplicity of outcomes. "I need more time," Marco said. "Time is what we do not have." Thomas rose to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Brother, I have watched you for 3 years since father died. You wait for certainty that will never come. You study the markets, the weather, the politics of 3 kingdoms, and still you hesitate. At some point, you must trust your own judgment, or you will trust nothing at all." After Thomas left, Marco remained alone with the ledger. The figures blurred before his eyes. He thought of his father, who had made decisions in moments, swift, definitive, often successful, sometimes ruinous. But never paralyzed. Never trapped in the endless spiral of what if. Marco's hands trembled as he lifted the quill once more. He had spent weeks analyzing the silk trade, reading merchants' reports, consulting price histories from 3 cities. He knew more than he had ever known. And still, it was not enough to quiet the voice that whispered, "What if you are wrong?" Marco closed his eyes and made the mark. One word on the parchment. "Buy." His heart hammered in his chest as though he had just committed treason. The hesitation did not disappear. It simply became irrelevant. The decision was made. Thomas found him 3 hours later, still sitting at the desk, staring at the single word that had changed everything. "You decided," Thomas said, seeing the marked ledger. "I did," Marco replied, his voice steady despite the trembling in his stomach. "But I am terrified." Thomas sat across from him, candlelight casting long shadows across his face. "That is when courage begins, brother. Not when fear is absent, but when you move despite it." The silk arrived 6 weeks later. The shipment was delayed by coastal storms, but it arrived intact. Marco sold it at a profit, modest, but genuine. Yet something more valuable had shifted within him. He had acted on his own judgment and survived the consequences. The world had not collapsed beneath his feet. His hesitation had not been wisdom protecting him from ruin, it had been fear wearing wisdom's mask. Over the following months, Marco continued to study the markets with the same diligence his father had taught him. But he no longer waited for perfect certainty before moving. He trusted the ground he had already walked. He made decisions, some that gained, some that lost, but each decision was his own. Each choice strengthened the quiet voice within him that said, "You know enough. You are capable enough. Move forward." By year's end, the merchant house had grown. Not because Marco had become reckless, but because he had learned the difference between prudent caution and paralyzing doubt. Thomas watched his brother transform from a man frozen at the threshold into a man who walked through doors, uncertain but steady. One evening, as they reviewed accounts together by lamplight, Thomas said, "You have found it." "Found what?" Marco asked. "Self-trust. Not arrogance. You still fear loss, as you should. But you trust yourself enough to act despite the fear. That is where courage truly lives." Marco nodded, understanding at last that hesitation and courage are not opposites. They coexist in every genuine act of bravery. The difference is which one you choose to follow. From this story we learn that hesitation does not protect us, it imprisons us. And that quiet self-trust is built not by waiting for certainty that will never come, but by taking one trembling step forward and discovering we are capable of bearing the consequences of our own judgment.